What the heck happened to Forrest Griffin?
Hi, I'm Forrest Griffin, UFC light heavyweight.
The dude was a fan favorite, a UFC legend, and one half of the fight that literally saved the UFC.
Get to be in the UFC and get to have my dream.
But after leaving the Octagon, Forrest kind of disappeared from the spotlight. So, where has he been? What has he been up to since his wild days in the Octagon? From slapping legends in The Ultimate Fighter to catching knockouts in Power Slap, we are about to break down Forrest Griffin's life after fighting. And trust me, you don't want to miss this. To really understand Forrest Griffin and what he has been up to nowadays, you have to go back to where it all began. Columbus, Ohio, 1979. Forrest wasn't always destined to be an MMA legend. Growing up, like a lot of people, he had aspirations to do something totally different. He wanted to serve in law enforcement, and that is the path he initially started down. But like fate tends to do, it took him in a different direction. Forrest developed an interest in martial arts. What started out as just another way to stay in shape quickly turned into a passion that would consume his life. Martial arts gave him structure, discipline, and an outlet for his energy. While training and working as a police officer, Forrest found himself more and more drawn to the world of mixed martial arts. Eventually, he made the decision that would change his life. He stepped away from law enforcement to pursue MMA full-time. He joined one of the best gyms in the game, Extreme Couture, where he trained under the legendary Randy Couture. And for those who don't know, Extreme Couture is one of the most well-respected gyms in MMA history, and having Randy as a mentor was a massive step forward for Forrest. Forrest fought in smaller promotions across the country, scraping by, living fight to fight. He was building a name for himself as a tough, relentless competitor, but there was no guarantee that he would ever get his big break. That big break came in 2005 when Forrest Griffin became one of the participants in the very first season of The Ultimate Fighter. Now, for younger MMA fans, it's hard to imagine a time when the UFC wasn't the global powerhouse that it is today. But back then, the UFC was on some shaky ground. The company was bleeding money, and it was struggling to gain mainstream attention. The Ultimate Fighter was seen as a Hail Mary, a last-ditch effort to save the organization. Forrest didn't just participate in TUF, he stole the show. His blend of humor, grit, and undeniable talent made him a fan favorite right out of the gate. But it wasn't just his personality that won people over, it was what happened inside the cage. The Ultimate Fighter Season 1 finale was a pivotal moment, not just for Forrest, but for the UFC as a whole. It was April 9th, 2005, and Forrest Griffin faced Stephen Bonnar in a 3-round war that would go down in history. Both fighters left everything inside the Octagon. They stood toe-to-toe, trading blows for 15 minutes in a fight that is still talked about as one of the most entertaining and important bouts in MMA history. This wasn't just a fight, it was a turning point for the UFC. Dana White has said many times that if it weren't for Forrest and Stephen, the UFC might not be where it is today. After that fight, the UFC's popularity exploded. New fans poured in, the sport started to become mainstream, and the organization's future was secured.
How does Stephen Bonnar get into the Hall of Fame? Blah, 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 blah. Let me tell you what. This was the most important fight in the history of this company.
Forrest Griffin didn't just win the fight, he helped save the UFC. After that unforgettable Ultimate Fighter finale, Forrest's career hit a new level. He wasn't just the guy who had a wild brawl on TV anymore. He was becoming a legitimate contender in the UFC's stacked light heavyweight division. In 2007, Forrest took on Mauricio Shogun Rua at UFC 76. Shogun was widely considered one of the best light heavyweights in the world, and many fans thought Forrest had bitten off more than he could chew. But Forrest came in with a chip on his shoulder, determined to prove the doubters wrong. After 3 rounds of back-and-forth action, Forrest shocked the world by submitting Shogun in the 3rd round. That victory earned him a title shot, and suddenly, people started seeing Forrest as more than just an entertaining fighter. He was a real threat. Then came UFC 86, one of the biggest nights of Forrest's career. He stepped into the Octagon against Quentin Rampage Jackson for the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship. Rampage was an intimidating force, a guy who could knock you out with a single punch. But Forrest was prepared. Over 5 hard-fought rounds, Forrest outworked Rampage, securing a unanimous decision victory and becoming the new UFC Light Heavyweight Champion. Now this was the pinnacle of Forrest's fighting career. Winning the belt solidified him as one of the best in the world, especially in one of the toughest divisions in the UFC.
Self-preservation is the most powerful instinct we have. And when you're in there, it's either me or it's him. And it's not going to be me.
It was an emotional moment for him and his fans, a validation of all the hard work that he had put in over the years. But as with any fighter's career, the highs are always accompanied by lows. Forrest's title reign didn't last long. In his first title defense at UFC 92, he faced Rashad Evans. After a competitive start, Rashad found his mark in the 3rd round, catching Forrest with a series of punches that led to a TKO finish. It was a tough loss, but one that Forrest took in stride. And if you know anything about Forrest Griffin, you know he never backed down from adversity. Forrest's career was far from over, but the setbacks kept coming. He faced some of the toughest competition the UFC had to offer, including a brutal knockout loss to Anderson Silva at UFC 101. Silva's striking was on another level that night, and Forrest, being the competitor that he is, took the fight head on. Unfortunately, Silva's precision and speed proved to be too much, and Forrest was finished in the 1st round. Still, Forrest continued to compete at the highest level, taking on Tito Ortiz in a trilogy of fights that became a staple of UFC history. Forrest won 2 out of the 3 matchups, cementing his legacy as a fan favorite and tough-as-nails competitor who never backed down, no matter who the opponent was. But after years of putting his body through hell, the injuries began to pile up. Forrest had dealt with back problems, shoulder issues, and countless other injuries throughout his career. By 2013, after nearly a decade of competing in the UFC, Forrest knew it was time to hang up the gloves. On May 26, 2013, after a long and storied career, Forrest Griffin announced his retirement from MMA. Chronic injuries had taken their toll, and he knew he could no longer compete at the level that he demanded of himself.
Good call.
Yeah, like, hey, I can't do this
blew
anymore.
my knee out twice in an 8-month period. So,
Ooh.
yeah.
Surgery both times?
Yeah.
Dang.
So that was it, and I was just frustrated.
Yeah.
My shoulder was already done, and I'd actually tried to adjust my style to get away from my shoulder to use my feet more, and then I blew my knee out.
Yeah. Did you try to go out on top? Like, I mean, if you look at a career, it's like...
No. I was totally fine knowing that I would never be in the top 5 again.
Forrest left the sport with a professional record of 19 wins and 7 losses. But his legacy wasn't about the numbers. It was about the heart, grit, and passion that he brought to every fight. UFC President Dana White described Forrest as one of the most important fighters in UFC history, a guy who helped build the sport into what it is today. Even though his fighting days were over, Forrest wasn't done with MMA. In fact, retirement was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Shortly after retiring, Forrest was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, a recognition that he undoubtedly deserved for everything he had contributed to the sport. His fight with Bonnar was also inducted into the Hall of Fame, a fitting tribute to the bout that helped launch the UFC into the mainstream. But Forrest wasn't content to just sit on the sidelines and enjoy retirement. He took on a new role within the UFC as the Vice President of Athlete Development. This is a job that goes beyond just training fighters. It's about mentoring them, helping them navigate the challenges of being a professional athlete, and preparing them for life both inside and outside the cage. At the UFC Performance Institute in Las Vegas, Forrest works closely with up-and-coming fighters, helping them develop their skills, stay in peak physical condition, and manage the pressures that come with fighting on the biggest stage. His experience as a fighter, combined with his down-to-earth personality, makes him the perfect mentor for the next generation of UFC athletes. Forrest also found success outside of the fight game. He became a best-selling author with his book, Got Fight, which gave fans an inside look at the world of MMA through Forrest's unique, often hilarious perspective. The book was a hit with MMA fans and showcased Forrest's sharp wit and self-deprecating humor. Now, if you thought Forrest was only sticking to MMA, think again. Forrest has expanded his role in combat sports by joining Power Slap, a new and emerging combat sport that has been generating a lot of buzz. Now, if you haven't heard of Power Slap, here's the breakdown. It's a combat sport where two competitors take turns slapping each other with full force. The goal is to knock out your opponent or outlast them by absorbing their strikes. It's a unique, high-risk, high-reward sport that has quickly gained popularity among fans who love intense, action-packed competition. Forrest Griffin plays a key role in Power Slap and brings his wealth of experience from MMA to Power Slap. He has taken on an unexpected but crucial role in the world of combat sports: catcher for Dana White's Power Slap League.
I'm kind of doing it for research purposes. I'm just interested to see like the different types of impacts and what happens.
What does that mean? Well, in Power Slap, when a competitor gets knocked out, they often fall hard and fast. To ensure the safety of the athletes, there are catchers standing by to catch the competitors as they fall, preventing them from hitting the ground with full force. Forrest, with his quick reflexes and knowledge of combat sports, is one of those catchers. He's right there in the heat of the action, ready to protect the fighters even as they push their limits. Forrest's involvement in Power Slap isn't just about helping the sport grow, it's about doing it the right way. He is using his platform and expertise to help establish regulations and safety measures that ensure Power Slap can thrive without compromising the well-being of its competitors. Just like he did in the UFC, Forrest is working behind the scenes to elevate this new combat sport and make sure that it has a bright future. Outside of the fight world, Forrest Griffin is a family man. He's kept much of his personal life private, but we do know that he is incredibly dedicated to his family and enjoys spending time with his loved ones now that his fighting days are behind him. In addition to his roles in the UFC and Power Slap, Forrest has also dedicated himself to philanthropy. He is involved in a number of charitable projects, many of which are focused on fighter health and wellness, an issue that is particularly close to his heart. After spending years dealing with injuries and the physical toll of combat sports, Forrest is committed to advocating for better health care and resources for fighters. He has also participated in community outreach programs, helping to raise awareness for causes related to mental health and wellness, as well as offering his time and energy to support veterans and first responders. It is clear that even outside the cage, Forrest is still finding ways to give back. Forrest Griffin's influence on the sport of MMA is undeniable. He is one of the fighters who helped bring the UFC into the mainstream, and his fights are still used as examples of what MMA is all about: grit, determination, and an unbreakable will to win. But Forrest's legacy goes beyond his fights. He has inspired countless fighters who grew up watching him on The Ultimate Fighter or in his wars inside the Octagon. His never-say-die attitude, combined with his humility and humor, made him a role model for many of today's top fighters. Forrest Griffin is one of those rare athletes whose legacy will live on, not just because of what he did inside the cage, but because of who he is outside of it. His humor, honesty, and relentless spirit have earned him a place in the hearts of MMA fans around the world. There is no doubt about it. Forrest Griffin is one of the pioneers of modern MMA. His fight with Bonnar at the Ultimate Fighter finale changed the trajectory of the UFC, helping to elevate the organization to the global powerhouse it is today. Without that fight, it is hard to say where the UFC, and maybe even MMA as a whole, would be right now. But Forrest's impact goes beyond that one iconic moment. He inspired a generation of fighters to follow their dreams, no matter how tough the journey might be. His career was full of highs and lows, but through it all, Forrest stayed true to who he was, a warrior with a sense of humor and a deep love for the sport. He has been honored with awards, titles, and a place in the UFC Hall of Fame. But perhaps his greatest achievement is the respect and admiration that he has earned from fans and fellow fighters.